Welcome back, everybody. We're going to get into our next section, and that's parachute emergency procedures. If you're following along in your STP manual, this starts on page 40. Before we get too far into the malfunctions, let's talk about some important key altitudes. That's your decision altitude and your hard decks. Your decision altitude, if you remember what altitude it is, call it out. If you said 2,500 feet, you're absolutely correct. 2,500 feet, if we have any one of these malfunctions, we need to make that decision prior to that altitude whether or not we can land this parachute safely. If we can't land that parachute safely, we're going to execute our emergency procedures, cutting away and going to our reserve. The hard deck, if you guessed 1,000 feet, you guessed correctly. Between 2,500 and 1,000 feet, if you haven't been able to fix one of these issues, shame on you. You should have fixed it beforehand, or if something else just randomly happens in the middle of those altitudes, you still have plenty of time between 2,500 and 1,000 feet to safely execute your EPs by cutting away and going to reserve. We're going to talk about below 1,000 feet a little bit later. All right, let's get started and talk about the two different main types of malfunctions. You have totals and you have partials. The difference between a total and partial has to do with whether the pin has been removed out of the container or not. A total malfunction, the pin is still in place, the container is still closed. With a partial malfunction, the pin has been removed, the flaps are open, the deployment bag is out, lines, material, you can see something outside of the container. With total malfunctions, there's three kinds of total malfunctions. We have a hard pull where you can't pull it. We have I can't find my handle. And we have I pulled my handle, nothing's happening, and my flaps are still closed. With can't find it, can't pull it, it's pretty easy. We're going to make only 2 attempts to find or pull that handle. If we can't, we're going to go straight to reserve. If I found it and I throw it and nothing happens, I'm going to look over my shoulder, make sure my flaps are still closed. If they're still closed, I'm going to go straight to reserve. If my flaps are open, then it's a partial malfunction. So then I'm going to cut away and go to reserve. Now we're going to talk about the partial malfunctions. We've broken this down into about 3 sections to make this a little bit easier to grasp. We have our high-speed partial malfunctions where you need to act fast, cut away, get to reserve really quickly. We have low-speed partial malfunctions where you have a little bit of time where you can evaluate, then make a new decision, and then act on that decision. Then we're going to talk about the 2 outs. Let's talk about the first group first. They're high-speed partials where we need to act immediately. We have a few that we can talk about pretty quick. Bag locks, streamers, tension knots, line overs, any sort of major structural failure that happens on the parachute. Those are all high-speed malfunctions where we need to act quickly by cutting away and going to reserve. With the bag lock, you're going to look up over your head and you're going to see your lines going straight up with a bag over the top of your head, no other parachute material out. It's a very high-speed malfunction. You may even be increasing your fall rate because you're losing the drag of your body during this malfunction. This malfunction requires immediate action. Cut it away, go to reserve. The streamer malfunction, you get stood up, you look up and you see your parachute outside of the bag and it's just shaking back and forth in a tiny little ball. After about 5 seconds, if this hasn't cleared or started to develop into a good parachute, cut it away, go to reserve. Tension knots. If you're looking at the picture on the screen right now and you look closely, you can see the knots that are interfering with the slider and not allowing the slider to come all the way down. Not every time is it going to look like this where it's perfectly symmetrical across all 4 line groups. Most of the time you'll see tension knots either with the side line groups or with the front and back line groups. A line over. A line over is pretty obvious. It looks like a bow tie down the middle. So that's probably not going to work very well at all. So let's just cut that away and go to reserve. Any kind of major structural failure. Big hole in the canopy. You look up and you see blue sky through your parachute. You see a bunch of lines or your risers flapping around in the wind. Those are major structural failures. Cut those away, go to reserve. With all of the malfunctions that I just mentioned, go back to your 3 S's. They don't satisfy any of them. None of these are square. None of these are flying stable, and there is no way we're going to be able to do steerability checks on these. Okay, the next group we're going to talk about is our low-speed partial malfunctions. These are the ones that we have a little bit of time when we can evaluate and then act on the information that we have. We're going to talk about small holes, having only 1 broken line that just isn't your steering line, the pilot sheet over the nose, slider hang up with a little bit of end cell closure, toggle fires, and line twists. Small hole in the parachute. A small hole is defined by if the hole is smaller than your head and you can't see blue sky through it. If the hole is smaller than your head, you can reach up, unstow your toggles, and do a very aggressive control check. Try to stress out that parachute. Try to make that hole bigger. If that hole gets bigger, makes your decision really easy. Cut away and go to reserve. If the hole doesn't get bigger, evaluate how your control check went. Can you steer it satisfactorily? Can you land it safely? If the answer to either of those two questions is no, cut it away and go to reserve. If you can land it safely, continue to fly that parachute as normal, maybe fly it a little bit more gently though. With one broken line, the rules are pretty similar to the small hole in the canopy. If it's one broken line and not one of your steering lines, do an aggressive control check. Try to stress out that parachute, try to break it some more. If no other lines break, continue to fly it gently. Evaluate on those same kinds of questions. What's the performance of the canopy feel like, and can I land it safely? Pilot chute over the nose. If you ever experience this, do an aggressive control check. It does happen with slow opening parachutes every once in a while. So if you do see this happen, give it a control check. You likely won't notice anything wrong with the handling, but if you do, again, it makes the decision really easy. Cut it away, go to reserve. Slider hangup and end cell closure. That's a pretty common problem with slow opening docile parachutes. For most of you young jumpers that are renting gear here at Spaceland, guess what? You're flying slow opening docile parachutes. So it's most likely you've seen this before. Unstow your toggles, do your normal control check. By the time you finish your normal control check, you probably fixed this problem. If it still hasn't fixed itself, check your altitude and evaluate how much time you have. You may have to give it a couple more practice flares in order to fix the slider hangup end cell closure. If the slider's hung up, you need it to come down at least halfway in order to continue flying the parachute. With end cell closure, you want at least 50% of end cell inflation. If you can't get either of these things before your decision altitude, cut it away, go to reserve. Let's talk about toggle fires for a second. Every once in a while, once we open up, one of our brakes comes unstowed. If one of our brakes comes unstowed, that's going to put us into a turn. The easiest thing to do is reach up, get both your toggles, unstow them, finish out a full control check, and then reevaluate the parachute. This is also a good time to bring up acceptable limits of controllability. If any time you finished a control check and you realize your parachute is turning for any reason, and it takes more input than bringing one toggle down to eye or ear level, then you need to cut that away. If it only comes to eye or ear level, you can still finish a flare by staggering your hands. Okay, let's talk about line twists. Line twists are a little bit different. All of these previous low speed malfunctions we've talked about, we've been able to do a full control check and then reevaluate the problem. With line twists, we're going to do that a little bit differently. We're going to get out of those line twists first. Reach up on the risers, pull them apart, kick twice, check your altitude, kick twice, check your altitude, repeat as necessary. Remember to keep continuing to monitor your altitude to make sure that you're not getting too close to your decision altitude. All of these low speed malfunctions that we've just talked about satisfy a few of the three S's, and we need to evaluate the third. They're mostly square, or they're either square, or they're mostly square. They're mostly flying stable, so we're going to give it a chance and see if we can control them. If we can't get them under control, same response as we talked about. Cut them away, go to reserve. Okay, the next group of malfunctions that we're going to talk about is our two-out scenarios. There's three kinds of two-outs: your biplane, your side-by-side, and a downplane. The first step for all three of these scenarios is the same. We're going to locate our RSL, and we're going to take no more than 2 attempts to disconnect the RSL. Let's talk about a biplane first. Biplane, you have one parachute in front of the other, kind of a truck and trailer scenario. We're going to identify the front canopy, otherwise the most dominant canopy, and we're going to steer it with toggles gently. Unstow the toggles and fly it towards a big open area. In the first two of these three scenarios, we're going to steer these parachutes to a big open area, get our feet and knees together, be ready to PLF, and no flare with a two-out scenario. The side-by-side. We're going to look up and identify the most dominant parachute. With a side-by-side, it's going to be the parachute that is most over your head. For Spaceland equipment, it's very important to note that the yellow toggles go to the main, the red toggles go to the reserve. When looking at this picture, you can see that the risers are going across each other, so let's make sure that we're grabbing the correct inputs for the correct canopy. Same rules, fly it gently on toggles, steer it to a big open field, feet and knees together, no flare, and be ready to PLF. Either one of those two scenarios could turn into a downplane. If you get more than half a canopy width in between these two parachutes, it's gonna turn into a downplane. If you haven't already, disconnect your RSL and cut away the main. After you get the reserve parachute directly back over your head, time and altitude permitting, go ahead and do a quick control check on it. Most likely you won't have that kind of time, so get the toggles unstowed and then fly the reserve as normal as you can. All right, let's talk about the scariest malfunction that we can think of. That would be the out-of-sequence horseshoe malfunction. The out-of-sequence horseshoe malfunction happened because our bag lines have come out of the container before a pilot chute. Think back to the deployment sequence. Activation is when we throw our pilot chute. Deployment is when the deployment bag is supposed to lift off and come off our shoulders, and then inflation is when the canopy starts to expand. We have deployment before activation in this scenario. So if you can think back to all the rules of twos that we've talked about with all these other parachute malfunctions, how many attempts do you think you get to put this back in sequence? That's right, you get 2. If you reach back, you find your hacky immediately, and you get this malfunction back in sequence, be ready to deal with any of the malfunctions we've already talked about. How many attempts do you think you get again? That's right, only 2. You reach back, you couldn't find it on that second try, you must execute your emergency procedures. Cut away. Make sure the risers have actually left, then go to reserve. Other kinds of horseshoe malfunctions that we may encounter. Pilot chute wrapped around our arm. We reach back, we find our handle, we throw our pilot chute, and it wraps around our arm a couple of times. I want you to lean back, stick your arm into the relative wind as best as possible, and wave as hard as you can. How many tries do you think you get with this one? That's right, only 2. Remember to check your altitude in between each try. If on that second try you look back, make sure to glance at your flaps and make sure you haven't pulled your pin. If you pulled your pin, it's a partial malfunction. If your pin is still in place, it's a total malfunction. Bear in mind, with the pilot chute wrapped around your arm, it's going to be pulling on it really hard. You may not be able to reach your handles with both hands. Be ready or able to pull your handles with just one hand. Another type of horseshoe malfunction is the pilot chute gets thrown around your leg. The same idea as with the arm, you want to get your leg into the relative wind as much as possible and shake it vigorously. Remember to check your altitude in between and maybe glance back to make sure you haven't accidentally opened your container. If your container is still closed, treat it as a total. If your container is open, treat it as a partial. Let's talk about canopy collisions for a minute. The best thing to do to avoid a canopy collision is keep your head on a swivel and be aware of those around you. But let's just say it's inevitable. You're going to impact another canopy or another person. Get as small and as tight with your body as you can. Cover up your neck, get your feet and knees together, cover up your vital organs. The parachute lines we're flying on get really sharp when they're under tension, so we want to protect as much as we can. Once the collision has happened, typically what you'll see is one jumper will be above the other jumper. The high jumper has the responsibility to try to untangle the mess and fly the stack. Remember, as the high jumper, you're the one with the good canopy. The lower jumper, your responsibility is to check the altitude and report it back to the higher jumper to make sure everything's going okay. Make sure that when we communicate with each other in this kind of a scenario that we use only positive communication. If for any reason either jumper sees one or the other go limp or go stagnant, immediately cut away. The tension from your lines or from your parachute might be causing the other to go unconscious. So let's talk about the hard deck. That was the last altitude we talked about at the very beginning. Remember what altitude that is? That's right, 1,000 feet. We just finished talking about canopy collisions, but regardless of anything that happens, entanglement, something else goes wrong with your parachute, or you haven't been able to fix any of those other malfunctions, shame on you if you get that low without have made your decision beforehand. But if you're under 1,000 feet and something is wrong with your parachute or you're in a canopy entanglement, you only have one choice. Pull your reserve, get more fabric out over your head, slow everything down as much as you possibly can. All right, thank you everybody so much for your time. Remember, get into your book, study these malfunctions. Take a look at each individual picture and have a plan in mind. Also, don't forget, you are going to be required to practice this with your instructor once you get here to the drop zone. That's it for this malfunction section. We're going to see you in the next video. We're going to go over gear checks.